All right, everybody, this is Ghost Stories Episode 2. We're going to talk about the pirate lights of Pamlico Sound. Now, Ocracoke and Portsmouth Islands are permeated with the ghost of Blackbeard, most famous of all American pirates. There is scarcely a beach of either sound or ocean shore of these islands that has not echoed to the booming roar of his voice and felt the heavy tread of his tremendous boots. Ocracoke was his village, and he loved it with a fierce and jealous affection, which he obviously did not feel for Hatteras, although he frequently visited that island as well. It was on Ocracoke that this famous brigand lived, drank his rum, and roared his threats against British authority. Bathtown was another home he loved, but it was not near the sea, his natural habitat. Blackbeard had good cause, he thought, to defy British authority. He was often heard to complain in a most profane manner about a king who would train an honest seaman in a way of life and then turn about and make it a crime to live that way of life. Born in Bristol, England, and christened Edward Drummond, he went to sea at an early age as a cabin boy. As a young man, he served as a seaman aboard a British privateer in what is known to history as Queen Anne's War. Under this arrangement, it was perfectly legal for the patriotic duty of the captain of a ship licensed as a privateer to attack a merchant ship flying the flag of France, impress or imprison the merchantman's crew, and then share in the division of the captured ship's cargo. Of course, sometimes a Spanish flag was mistaken for a French one, but the wartime government of Britain was not inclined to quibble over technicalities. Now, under this arrangement, the Crown was spared the expense of paying the crew and of outfitting and supplying the ship. Enemy shipping was destroyed or captured, and a portion of valuable cargoes was delivered to the official treasury. Now, all that was necessary was a license as a privateer, and a captain became his own naval commander, his own tactician, and his own bookkeeper for the division of spoils. Some of the very best and bravest of English captains served at one time or another as privateers. The profits were huge. When the war had come to an end, though, and peace was made with France, what had been patriotism became piracy, and this was the burden of Blackbeard's complaint, or at least so he said. At the war's end, Edward Teach, he had changed his name from Drummond to Teach or Thatch or Tatch, was a lieutenant under a Captain Hornigold, a very successful privateer. Now the Crown offered amnesty to all former privateersmen and or pirates who would reform and swear an oath of law-abiding fealty to the king, and of course surrender to the Crown such captured ships as they were using. Captain Hornigold decided to take the king's pardon. He moved ashore, took the oath, and settled down to enjoy the profits of his former occupation. Now, since Teach, however, had no accumulated wealth, he just kept possession of the ship that Hornigold had given him to command and set sail for the Americas to seek his own fortune. If there had been any doubt before that act branded Edward Teach a pirate, renaming his vessel the Queen Anne's Revenge and recruiting as desperate and able a crew from the Brotherhood of the Sea as can well be imagined, he soon made a name for himself as the scourge of the Atlantic seaboard. He even took on the British man-of-war HMS Scarborough and fought her on even terms for several hours before the Scarborough broke off the engagement and ran for cover. It was after this victory that Teach adopted the name Blackbeard. He was the possessor of a magnificent bushy beard, the color of jet. This hirsute adornment extended from just beneath his eyes all the way down to his waist, hiding his belt buckle. It was almost as wide as his barrel-shaped chest and served as a sort of banner or rallying flag for his henchmen in the thick of hand-to-hand battle. Since Teach was nearly 7 feet in height, this expanse of beard was awe-inspiring to friend and foe alike. To make his appearance even more frightful, he would twist little pigtails in his beard and tie them with red ribbons. Then he would coil a snake-like, slow-burning match of punk around his head, just over his ears and under the brim of his hat. When both ends of this decoration were lit and smoking, and his white teeth were gleaming in an evil grin amidst the heavy black beard, our pirate might well have been mistaken for the devil himself. Completely fearless, this giant of a pirate roamed the Atlantic at will, taking as he went prizes in the form of noble ships, which he either sunk or else manned with a prize crew of pirates. Never one to hang back from the thick of a personal combat, Blackbeard always led the charge of the fearsome boarding parties and swarmed from the deck of the Revenge into the scoopers of the victim. The sight of this monster, with what looked like blazing horns protruding from his brow, red ribbons bedecking a huge beard, a pistol in one hand, and a gleaming sword in the other, was enough to frighten any defender half to death to begin with. Even the mention of his name was enough to strike fear into the hearts of merchants and seamen alike. At one time, he actually blockaded the city of Charleston, South Carolina, with his one ship and forced that proud city to pay a ransom of a fortune in drugs and medicine before he sailed away, keeping his word not to put the city to the torch once the ransom was paid. Blackbeard's favorite territory, though, seemed to be Ocracoke and Portsmouth. He could sell his captured cargoes to the merchants there much cheaper than they could buy elsewhere, and without their having to pay a farthing to British tariff. This was the territory that he considered to be his home base. Here he went to careen his ships, repair battle damage, and fit them out for more piracy. On Ocracoke Island he built himself a large and comfortable house, 2 stories high and containing many large rooms. This house became known through the years as Blackbeard's Castle. This is where the pirate lived when he came ashore and where he counted and arranged his treasure before moving it to hiding places which, according to his own statement, shortly before his death, were known only to the devil and to the pirate captain himself. Blackbeard's large castle was abandoned after his death to grow up in weeds and was almost completely hidden by the undergrowth. It was finally torn down in the name of progress to make way for a more modern structure. It was near Ocracoke Inlet that an incident took place which resulted in the permanent crippling of Israel Hands, first mate of the pirate band. It seems that Teach and Hands were sitting at a table with a third brigand drinking rum. They were below decks in their ship, and a single candle on the table gave a faint light to the scene. In a test of courage, Blackbeard pulled his loaded pistol from his belt and held it under the table, vowing to shoot any man who did not run. He then blew out the candle and started counting. The crewmen broke and ran, but Israel Hands remained sitting and continued to drink from his goblet. With no compunction whatsoever, Blackbeard pulled the trigger and blasted away in the direction of the chair in which he had last seen his trusted mate before blowing out the candle. The slug hit the unlucky Israel in the knee and ranged upward into his thigh. Rum was administered, and the bullet was cut out of his leg then and there, but Israel Hands remained crippled from the wound as long as he lived. The rugged pirate was the prototype from which Robert Louis Stevenson created his fictional pirate of the story Treasure Island. Stevenson even gave his creation the name of this first mate of the Blackbeard ship. Present-day charts of the water around Ocracoke still show Teach's Hole, where the drunken master pirate's aim in the darkness was still accurate enough to cripple his good friend. At one time in his career, Blackbeard apparently decided to give up piracy. He had amassed a goodly amount of treasure to live on, and he got the idea that he would like to live ashore. Sailing into Bath Town, he notified the British authorities that he was reformed, that he wished to mend his evil ways and to take the oath of loyalty to the crown. Full pardon was granted to our newly loyal subject by the authorities, and he gave up his ship and bought a house on the point of Bath Creek. He even married the 16-year-old daughter of a local farmer and made her mistress of his home. What, if anything, he did about wives he was reputed to have in Elizabeth City, in Edmonton, and in Ocracoke is unknown. But it is unlikely the four ladies ever met one another. A gentleman's life ashore apparently meant one long drunken spree for our hero, for that is exactly how he lived it, shamefully mistreating his young wife and opening his house and his purse to any and all comers. He dissipated in a short time the tidy fortune he had brought ashore. Then too, he began to have a genuine hunger for the sea and for shipboard life. He was a child of the sea, and he never felt really at home unless he was walking the deck of an ocean-going vessel. At length, he bought and fitted out such a boat and told all and sundry, she was to be used as an honest seagoing merchantman, naming his new craft the Adventure. He never did explain the meaning of the gun ports along both her sides, shutters that swung open to reveal the ugly snouts of cannon-mounted 'tween decks. Off to sea sailed the Adventure, with Edward Teach as her skipper, and back she came, time after time, towing crewless ships that Teach claimed to have found abandoned on the open sea with cargoes untouched. He still insisted that he was an honest merchant seaman who had the extreme good luck to find his prizes floating derelict on the ocean. Once again, his fortunes began to rise. After a few months of this pretense, Blackbeard tired of the sham and openly returned to pirating. That way, he didn't have to kill all the captured crews, and many of them came to be valued crewmen on his raider. With complete impartiality, our pirate preyed on the shipping of all nations. He would as soon sink a British ship as a Spanish one, nor was the commerce of the American merchants safe from his depredations. Then Edward Teach's overleaping of ambition proved his undoing. Not content with the fruit of his own labors, he conceived the grandiose scheme of fortifying Ocracoke Island and making it into a haven and refuge for all pirate ships. He himself was to reign there as a sort of king of the pirates while they were in his stronghold. As a fee for such sanctuary, he planned to charge each incoming ship a percentage of the prize money for the privilege of membership in the club. This plan would probably have succeeded because Teach was a master strategist and would have had capable help. The ship owners and merchants of the Carolinas heard of this dream, however, and were appalled at the prospect. Despairing of any help whatsoever from Governor Eden in Bath, they sent a delegation to Governor Spotswood of the colony of Virginia, imploring his aid and that of the British Navy. Spotswood agreed to help and promised to send a raiding party composed of men from 2 British warships then in Virginia ports. And so it came about. In November of 1718, Blackbeard was at anchor at Ocracoke, near the spot called Blackbeard's or Teach's Hole. He was expecting no trouble, but he had his full crew aboard, and the Adventure was repaired and in good shape for the sea. Unknown to the pirates, 2 sloops under the command of Lieutenant Maynard had arrived late the night before, sent as promised by Governor Spotswood to search for the pirates. These ships were manned by British sailors and Marines from the British Navy. They were under orders to take the brigand Blackbeard dead or alive. This they intended to do. At dawn on the clear, cold November day, Lieutenant Maynard sent out 2 small skiffs to take soundings to try to find the depth of the water near the anchored Adventure. If possible, they were to find a deep water access to the pirate craft. These strange and suspicious-looking craft were fired on by the Adventure when they failed to answer a hail. The accurate small arms fire from the Adventure was intended to warn rather than harm, but it drove the skiffs back to their parent ship in a hurry. At this point, the British ensign was run up on both sloops, and Blackbeard's hail was answered by a volley of rifle fire as the smaller of the two sloops set her sails and tried to find a channel through the sandbars to engage the Adventure. The channel was as tricky then as it is now, and the Britisher ran hard aground and stuck fast. This greatly delighted Teach, who knew these waters as most men know their dooryards. This stranded smaller sloop would be easy prey after he had dealt with the larger vessel, he thought. That larger sloop, the Ranger, was under the personal command of Maynard, who immediately got her under way and sailed closer to Blackbeard to make his small arms fire more effective. To Blackbeard's great glee, the Ranger also ran aground, but what appeared to be a more or less permanent stranding turned out in a few moments to have been only a temporary disabling of Maynard's vessel. Thinking he now had the Ranger at his mercy, Blackbeard slipped his anchor cable and left the secure position he had held behind the sand reef. Under a favorable wind and keeping to the familiar channel, he ran straight for the Ranger. At Teach's bellowed order, the gun ports were opened on both sides of the Adventure, and the cannon were run out, so that their muzzles protruded beyond the sides of the ship. Charges and load were placed in each cannon, and matches were made ready. Downboard the pirate ship upon the Ranger. At the last moment before collision, she turned alongside and brought her starboard guns to bear. The cannon fired almost as one, raking the Ranger fore and aft. As the Adventure then wheeled to return and present her labored battery, Maynard hastily ordered his men below decks. Around came the Buccaneer and sailed smartly back. This time the larboard cannon fired, again sweeping the decks of the Ranger fore and aft. However, this time there were no casualties, since only the dead from the previous salvo had remained on deck with Maynard. Seeing an apparently helpless sloop at his mercy, Teach then gave the order to come alongside and board the Ranger. Even as the as the grappling irons were being thrown, however, Maynard called to his men below decks, and they swarmed back topside, armed to the teeth with pistols and swords. As was his custom, Teach led the screaming, howling charge of men from one craft to the other. Cutlass and pistol in hand, he sprang to the deck of the Ranger and immediately sought out her commanding officer. For one brief instant in eternity, Blackbeard and Maynard glared into each other's eyes. Then, with a curse, Blackbeard charged, only to be met by the point-blank fire from Maynard's pistol. Tearing a groove along the side of the pirate's head, the bullet grazed but did not kill him. With a roar of pain and anger, Teach sprang once again for his adversary. But this time, one of Maynard's sword-wielding Marines attacked from the side. Swinging the heavy blade down with both hands and with all his might, the Marine cut so deeply into the side of Blackbeard's neck that it seemed he almost severed the great head from his body. With blood spouting from the gigantic cut and gore from his head wound almost blinding him, our pirate nonetheless closed with Maynard in an attempt to kill him. As all around them, the boarding party fought desperately with the Britishers. Maynard was too skillful a swordsman to be pinned down, and he fenced with Blackbeard, eluding him, dodging and inflicting yet more wounds on the huge body. The magnificent beard was now covered with matted blood, and the cruel eyes were beginning to glaze. Finally, Teach drew back one step, raised his pistol with his left hand to blast his enemy, and fell forward on his face, quite dead. The smoldering match, still around his head and almost touching the boots of Lieutenant Maynard, When they examined the body later, it was found that Teach had sustained some 37 major wounds, including that deadly cut in his neck, any one of which would have stopped a lesser man. Seeing this leader fall, the pirates then jumped into Pamlico Sound and swam or waded ashore. Their liberty was short-lived, however, since they were all rounded up and taken back to Virginia for trial. All but Israel Hands and one other were convicted of piracy and treason and hanged. Hands turned state's evidence and escaped the death penalty. When Blackbeard had been killed, his head was cut off and affixed to the bowsprit of the Ranger. There it remained until the ship returned to Virginia. What was finally done with the grisly trophy is not recorded, but there is one fine family in Massachusetts which claims that the skull was made into a giant cup, was then silver-plated, and is now in their possession. The great mutilated body of Blackbeard was tossed unceremoniously overboard, where legend claims it swam 3 times around the entangled Ranger and Adventure before it sank from sight beneath the water. Israel Hands, Blackbeard's crippled first mate, returned to England after the piracy trial and lived out his life in London. Governor Spotswood, however, although his term of governor had expired, steadfastly refused to return to England. He gave as his reason his fear of what other pirates might do to him, the man who had been responsible for the death of the famous Blackbeard, if they could manage to capture him. Thus, did the fear generated by Blackbeard actually outlive the man himself? Many men have tried to discover the fabled treasure that Blackbeard admitted having buried. Legend has it that Teach traveled as far inland as the site of the present town of Grimsland, some 10 miles east of Greenville, North Carolina, on the Tar River. At this location, the pirate is said to have had a sister who lived on a small farm which he had bought for her and which, in fact, still bears her name in the ancient records of the county. Blackbeard is said to have visited her on several occasions to recuperate from wounds and from extended sprees. There is an extremely old cypress tree near this site. With its roots in the waters of the river, it towers above all the other trees in the area. This tree is called Old Tabletop and was used as a lookout where the brigand stationed one of his henchmen to keep watch down the river and to warn against sudden attack. The tree is indeed flat across the top, and it would be a comparatively easy matter to construct a platform there which would command a view of the Tar River almost to the town of Washington. Great excitement prevailed in the neighborhood in 1933 when a Mr. Lee dug out of the river bank nearby a small iron pot half filled with old silver coins of various sizes. Now, Blount's Creek, near Washington, North Carolina, is another location where the treasure has been hunted and dug for, as well as Holiday's Island near the town of Edenton. If any of the searchers found any treasure, they kept the secret well. A farmer did plow up a metal bucket near Bath and found therein a number of silver coins and 3 gold coins, all of foreign make and all very old, but these were never definitely tied to Teach, and it is thought that perhaps some settler, fearful of an Indian attack, buried them there. To this day at Ocracoke, some will tell you that the Teach lights are still seen on occasion, both over and in the waters of Pamlico Sound. Blackbeard's ghostly ship is sometimes seen in the light of the waning moon. Some say the headless figure of Blackbeard can be seen in the dark of the moon as it swims around and around Teach's hole, searching for its severed head. They aver that it gleams with a phosphorescent glow and is plainly visible just below the surface of the water. When Teach's lights are seen, either above or below the surface of the water, it always portends disaster of some sort for the ones who see them. If there be a man brave or foolish enough to follow those lights until they come to rest, he would find Blackbeard's buried treasure. The only trouble is, he would also find the devil himself sitting cross-legged on the treasure, claiming his half as Blackbeard's sworn partner.